enough of vaccine misinformation on its site.
And false stories from phony sites to run circles around major news outlets.
Many people don't know the difference between something real and something created to deceive them.
Open your eyes.
If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
Today's IPCC report is a how-to guide to defuse the climate time bomb. It is a survival guide for humanity. As it shows, the 1.5 degree limit is achievable, but it will take a quantum leap in climate action. This report is a clarion call to massively fast-track climate efforts by every country and every sector and on every time frame. In short, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. The rate of temperature rise in the last half century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking. I have proposed to the G20 a climate solidarity pact in which all big emitters make extra efforts to cut emissions and wealthier countries mobilize financial and technical resources to support emerging economies in a common effort to keep 1.5 degrees alive. We have never been better equipped to solve the climate challenge, but we must move into warp speed climate action now. We don't have a moment to lose.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. We are on thin ice, according to the United Nations. What a surprise, right? As they push an Agenda 2030, they are going to continue to push climate change. For those of you that don't understand anything about climate change, it's time you start learning about climate change and know that doesn't mean learning about carbon emissions. It means about learning what the end game is with the climate change agenda, which is total control over your life, your carbon footprint, surveillance state, tracking your every single move, controlling your electric vehicle, controlling your Wi-Fi, air conditioner, and heat in your home, all of it control. And the UN and NATO and all of these globalist organizations are all working together to enslave the world population. Now, before I get into deep detail, you need to know this stuff about Turkey and NATO, about the earthquakes and how this was all done deliberately. You need to start wrapping your head around weather modification and weather control because, yes, there is some stuff going on with our weather. That's because of cloud seeding. That's because of natural disasters that they're causing through technology that they don't want you to know about. But if you actually use your brain, you can see that our government has used this type of technology before, but refuses to use it for good and only uses it against us and will not acknowledge the fact that they have the ability to do it, even though it's on record. You can go through CIA documents. You can see things like Operation Popeye. So I'll get into that in a minute. I just have a pet peeve about this channel and about some people comment and they're like, how come you're still here and you haven't been oppressed? I'm going to say this for the last time, all right? This channel was deleted for over a year. This channel came back. When they do that and they delete channels and let them come back and they're unmonetized and shadow banned, most of the people who follow the channel no longer follow. That's why they delete them and then allow them to come back. I've been on about 39 channels in the last 3 years. I've had 3 deleted this month. I've rebranded myself, which you can't name a YouTuber who has rebranded himself. I was a Time for Judgment for about 6 months, a Time for Justice for a month, and a Time to Uprise for a day. That's all within the last few months that occurred, and those channels were terminated. Okay, so the fact that I'm here still on YouTube is because I have to jump around and move around, and they keep tracing and tracking my channels even when I rebrand them and taking me down. I don't show my face, and that's one of the reasons I'm able to get around it. So, that being said, this channel is likely to get taken down because I haven't uploaded on it in a while. So they haven't had to monitor it. But when they start seeing the views that I'm getting and the content that I'm producing, they're going to take it down. It's just a matter of time. So please subscribe to my other channels below. If you can't join the website and things like that, that's perfectly understandable. But at the very least, please subscribe to my other channels if you want this type of content. One of the channels only has 14,000. I'm trying to build it out. I have to build out the channels by doing ridiculous things. That's how you get them approved from YouTube. So don't worry about the content that's there. I'm working very hard on ways to get around their algorithm and their tracking. That's what it's about. It's not about me trying to make ridiculous channels because I'm having a good time. It's about me trying to work around what they're doing. You probably have seen other YouTubers who just quit the platform and left. And I don't like so far what I'm seeing on Rumble. Okay, I don't like the platform. I don't like the layout. I don't like how they share the videos, how long it takes for it to get email blasted to people, all that stuff. I prefer to stay here. I always said that. So at the very least, please subscribe to those other channels. And now let's continue on with the important information. But I recommend you subscribe to those channels now because this video is likely to be removed because my channel got deleted for talking about this same thing a month ago about Turkey. So let's start with Turkey. So you have the United Nations warning about us being on thin ice, right? Because they're going to push in the fear of climate change and they're going to push in more restrictions on your life. Turkey, if you're not familiar, was refusing to let Finland into NATO as well as Sweden. Now, if you're not familiar with NATO, the New World Order, NATO, the UN, same difference, all the countries have to agree on who's allowed to get into NATO. Turkey was refusing to let these countries into NATO. So NATO came out and warned Turkey that there'll be dire consequences if they didn't let them in. And Turkey stubbornly said, we don't really care. So what happened next? Well, this cloud formation formed over Turkey. And in the coming weeks after this cloud formation, which I'll get into if you don't know how HAARP works and how they use the ionosphere, I'll get into that. But this appeared, and then suddenly there was an earthquake that just wouldn't stop in Turkey, killing over 50,000 people. Now here in America, we didn't hear all that much about it because instead our government was just constantly wearing pins that had the Ukrainian flag on it because it didn't fit their agenda. And of course, the United States is a part of NATO, as part of what they did to Turkey. So they just started hitting Turkey over and over again, never bringing up the fact that there was an earthquake over there. And of course, they don't want to bring up that there's an earthquake over there because they don't want people to connect the dots of why there was an earthquake and who was responsible for it, because they don't want you to understand weather control and weather manipulation. They want you to think that things like the earthquake in Turkey are because climate change. Oops, it's the boogeyman. Because remember, we always have to blame the boogeyman. The boogeyman in Afghanistan, the boogeyman in Russia, the boogeyman in the climate, because then the people responsible for sabotaging our world don't have to take responsibility. That's how it works. So Turkey refused to let these countries in. We had that cloud. We had an earthquake. We had a tragedy, which is not funny, which happened over in Turkey. All these people whose lives were destroyed and ruined and killed, just absolutely sickening. So what happens next? Well, after all this stuff, Turkey decides that they're going to finally allow Finland to join NATO, and now they're working on Sweden joining. So how does that work? Well, it's like the mob. They bullied them, and they said, hey, do you want more weather manipulation over there? Do you want us to create more chaos? And they said, all right, we submit. We wave the white flag. You can let these countries in.
Well, Turkey says it will support Finland's bid to join NATO.
That's right. This announcement comes after the presidents of both countries met in Ankara today. Both Finland and Sweden applied to become NATO members some 10 months ago in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NATO requires the approval of all 30 members to expand, but Turkey and Hungary have delayed that process. Erdogan expects Finland's ratification process to be completed after his country's elections in May. Take a look at this statement from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. He says the U.S. welcomes Erdogan's announcement and encourages Turkey to quickly ratify Sweden's accession as well.
Is anyone wondering why this is a priority after the devastation in Turkey? That suddenly Turkey, while this is still going on over there, while there's rubble in the streets, is meeting with Finland and saying, you can get in NATO now. Okay. Well, of course, because they waved the white flag and they surrendered and gave in to the New World Order. Because sometimes countries refuse to go along with their plans. Sometimes countries say, hey, look, I'm in for the New World Order. But what was going on with Sweden and Finland was that Turkey, which is primarily a Muslim nation, did not like what they were doing with the Quran and things like that. They were, mocking them and burning the Quran and stuff like that, so they refused. But once they, destroyed their country, they pretty much said, yeah, we'll let you in. So now they're letting them in. How convenient, right? But people out there go, I don't know about that stuff, is weather control, they can't wrap their head around it. Now, they can wrap their head around the fact that you could take a dump and watch football on your phone, but they can't seem to wrap their heads around the fact that they have technology to literally shatter the earth, to cause tsunamis, to cause earthquakes. I mean, it's very easy to see if you look up things like Operation Popeye. You can look up all the technology. You could hear JFK talking about it. But let's start with just the most basic technology of how they can cause earthquakes. And this goes back to Tesla, of course.
A fabled earthquake machine has also been linked to the enigmatic inventor Nikola Tesla. Some accounts say Tesla built a steam-powered oscillator which was designed to vibrate at various frequencies. The machine reportedly caused violent vibrations in a New York building, causing panic among people in the area who thought it was an earthquake. Tesla wanted to use the machine to transmit electricity via vibrations in the ground. The genius inventor believed that a powerful enough machine could even cause earthquakes. However, the idea did not progress beyond the prototype stage.
Dr. Agnew experienced the power of ELF waves firsthand back in the 1980s. He was hired by an energy company to locate oil and gas using the same kind of ELF waves at much lower frequencies to carry out his search. It's a process called earth tomography. But during one particular incident, Dr. Agnew believes his use of HAARP-like ELF waves accidentally triggered an earthquake.
It was in the spring of 1987 we arrived in Roseburg, Oregon to use our ELF technology to search for oil and gas. Setting up that day, we had a little bit different results than we expected because the instant that we energized it, there was between a 4 and 4.5 on the Richter scale earthquake that occurred. We were so amazed about what seemed to be cause and effect. We get to an area that has a high propensity for earthquakes in an area known as the megathrust of the Pacific Northwest. We turn it on and an earthquake occurs.
Dr. Agnew demonstrates how he may have triggered the quake.
This is a scale model of what the area looked like in Oregon when we scanned for oil and gas in 1987. This strata right here represents the megathrust area underneath the ground. The rock represents the potential energy set up in the ground from a tectonic stress. What we're going to do is introduce ELF waves and demonstrate that it can in fact trigger an earthquake.
In this case, Dr. Agnew is using a stereo speaker to produce the ELF waves needed for his demonstration.
ELF waves, extremely low frequency waves, are just like a subwoofer. In your car, you can actually feel the vibrations through your body. ELF waves are the same way. They vibrate the earth, and at right resonant frequencies, they can have devastating effects.
When the speaker is activated, ELF waves begin to emit. Tiny vibrations in the sand are detected. Then a few seconds later, the rock representing a fault line shifts.
As you can see, in a very few seconds, the resonant frequency built up in our model released the potential energy in the rock. That concussion, on a real scale, would have been felt for 100 miles. These conditions are already set up in the ground. All it takes is the activation energy to make the release happen. This is a small scale, and we're only using 30 watts in this scale.
When HAARP's broadcast array in Gakona, Alaska sends pulses of ELF waves into the ionosphere, the waves get reflected back down and pass through the earth and ocean. If 3.6 million watts of ELF waves were purposely or accidentally aimed at an already unstable fault line, it could, according to Dr. Agnew, cause a tremendous earthquake.
You know, looking at just simple instabilities, what does it take to create an avalanche? A guy walking across an unstable ice field. What does it take to trigger an earthquake? The right signal coming in when the pressures are already built up and they're at their threshold. That feather, and in our case that hammer, releases that energy.
Reports of those for decades, really, but no one's actually caught it on tape until just now.
In 1983, I did radio tomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HAARP uses 1 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the earth. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
So we know they have the ability to cause earthquakes. Then it's a question of, well, why would they do that? That's the thing I think most people have the hardest part wrapping their head around. Why would they ever do that to a country? They'd kill innocent people? Oh, kill innocent people. They want to kill all the people. Remember, they want to get the population down to 500 million people. And what are we at, 8 billion something? Although there's been a pretty good effort at depopulating the world over the last couple of years, if you catch my drift. But they also want to keep the world under their control. And remember, on the Georgia Guidestones, a lot of people forget, it says maintain humanity under 500 million, but right underneath it, it says in perpetual balance with nature, because nature's the thing that they're using to get away with all of this stuff. So people go, I can't wrap my head around it. Well, we know they have the technology to do it, okay? Then it's just a matter of understanding how sick and demonic these people are and realizing the fact that this is what their plan is overall with the New World Order. Because they don't have to take responsibility, so they're going to create and weaponize the weather. This is why we're seeing droughts all over the place, because they're using geoengineering to make sure that there's droughts. Why? Well, so food doesn't grow, and so that we don't have a water supply. So then what happens? Well, then we become more dependent on the government to take care of us, because guess who's got the food and water supply? See how it works? They know if you control the food and the water, as the old saying goes, they can control humanity, as Henry Kissinger, the scum of the earth, once said. So that's what they're working towards. And one of the other things that people need to understand, and I'll show you a clip that I've used all the time, it's really important, and hopefully some of you will share it with other people so you can see some of these pieces put together from government meetings, C-SPAN, Disney themselves talking about weather manipulation, JFK. It's all there. I mean, they have the ability. They've even shown videos where they've had the ability to cloud seed to create rain. So if we're having such a problem with the climate and so much drought, why does nobody in Congress ask the question of why we don't cloud seed to create rain so we don't have droughts? Oh, right. Because again, they want you to think that there's a problem with the climate, and they don't want you to realize that they have the ability to change what's going on, but they're the ones who are actually creating the problem with the climate. That's the whole point. Because if people figured that out, these people would be run out. These people will be done, but nobody will ever be able to wrap their head around it, and they know that. So they can continue to create these climate catastrophes. They can continue to create droughts and food shortages so that eventually you have to run to them. And of course, this has to do with taking the mark. This is how this system of control works. Most people just don't have a clue, or they don't want to even research it. It's pretty basic, okay? If they can blame the boogeyman, then they will do what they have to do. Now, or do what they want to do, excuse me. The other thing I talk about is the civil unrest in America and some of these other countries is that they are going to herd people into states, and I believe they will start using weather manipulation specifically in those cities and states, in those freedom cities that Trump talks about, places like Florida where they can drill them with HAARP, places like Texas where they can drill them with HAARP. Okay, I think that's going to be done by design, as well as other false flags that they will create. The liberals are going along with the communist order. So they're going to let them go along with it. They're going to test and experiment on them with blockchain inside their bodies, with their passports and all that stuff, which if you don't understand, you can join the website at callforanuprising.com to learn more about that stuff. That's all stuff that's been removed off of YouTube, of course. But let me show you some clips here if you don't understand how this works with climate manipulation, the ability of HAARP, and other things that they can do now at this point. Some of these clips are from 30, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, they're so much further advanced now that they, it's a joke what they have the ability to do, but it's an even bigger joke that people don't see it. How all these politicians are just on board because it's science, so you can't question the science. Have you heard that narrative in the last couple of years? About questioning the science and something's wrong with you if you question the science. So you mean the science that they make up and they tell you these ridiculous things about us being on thin ice, right? And people just go, I don't know what that means. Like, this is the United Nations quote. I'm talking about the window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future is rapidly closing. Oh, all of a sudden, right? While the banks are collapsing, while we have civil unrest. Wow. And of course, the climate on top of it, the thing that's going to control and bring everyone in and herd them into places the way that they want to, along with the civil unrest, of course. I mean, it's so obvious to see. Just people, it's too much for them to comprehend that people would be this wicked and this sick. but they watch these shows like Game of Thrones or Rome. They study these things and watch the History Channel, but they think all of a sudden that these people, that there aren't sick people who want to rule and control over you. Like there's just good, wonderful people. Why? Because these people present themselves as philanthropists. They use words like equity. These are all things to deceive you. These are all things to make you think, that they care about you. Unlike the days of Rome and things like that, where they would walk around with swords and just stab you and be like, hey, you're going to do this or we're going to throw you in a cell. Well, eventually we're going to get to that point, but first they're going to herd you in. So people are like, oh, these people wouldn't do that. There's no one that sick. They've weakened society. They've fluoridated everybody. They've weakened men. Look at the liberal men. They're not real men. They've turned men weak. Why? Because men will be the ones who would rise up against this. And then the other men, the Republican side, they brainwash into worshiping a false idol in Trump. And that's exactly where they want to herd them, into false flags and psyops and imprisonment. So we're left with not many men standing. I'm one of them, and most of you are too who listen to this channel. So these people are as wicked as you could possibly imagine. All you have to do is look at history. Look at humanity over history, people trying to rule and control. And now we have the weakest time period in the history of humanity. The weakest men. We have insane people getting empowered that think men can have babies. All this stuff, all done by design, Communist Manifesto. Okay? If you don't understand what I'm saying, again, join the website. But let me show you some clips here and wrap it up so you can understand more about weather manipulation and weather control and how climate change is a design from their technology to control the masses.
I wanted to ask a couple questions here about HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Several of you at the table have a little bit of a piece here. As you know, this is located up in Alaska. It's currently funded by the Air Force Research Lab. It was formerly funded by the Office of Naval Research. One of the prime customers is DARPA, which is currently running experiments at the facilities here. Then to Dr. Walker and Mr. Schaefer then, Dr. Walker, your agency is currently running the facility. I've mentioned that it's our understanding through the president of UAF that the plans are to move forward and demolish the facility this summer. So the question to you is that accurate? Can you explain why? And then perhaps to both you and Mr. Schaefer, is there any benefit in exploring a potential relationship with the University of Alaska to perhaps take over the HAARP?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took it over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. And but that work has been completed.
Get on to Mr. Yes. Fletcher. Another question on in an interview with the Los Angeles Times on April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilized it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base with Senator Pell.
I just want to repeat before I turn to questions.
Yes, but we do have all that information.
You're saying the government has created weather tampering techniques so that the, quote, New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans.
Worldwide.
Millions of Americans, and to control the rest.
Yes, sir, and that's my belief. As bizarre as that sounds, if somebody had told me that equipment even existed 10 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts, sir. And at this point in time, we have all the documents to prove it. And if you think that 85 tornadoes takes place in the middle of our growing area by simultaneous accident, I'm sorry. With the equipment that's already set up internationally, And as bizarre as that is, it is proven and documented. We will supply you with those documents. As bizarre as that is, I would say that weather wars, and this is quoting actually Senator Claiborne Pell himself, that they are the greatest weapon ever created in the world, and that's the senator's own statement. So yes, I do stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you.
These artificial clouds will block the sun from evaporating more water to feed the hurricane. The reports coming into the control center indicate that the diversionary cloud seeding over Kansas is now creating a flood danger. Specially equipped robot aircraft are dispatched immediately to release a high concentration of cloud seeding material into the fringes of the storm. Heavier seeding from the ground also helps to subdue the rain by spreading it over a wider area. The controller calls for another view of the hurricane, which has now moved closer to the coast.
Signal out on number 1 satellite. 10-minute interruption for correction. Have you anything else in the area?
Satellite station S1 is approaching area. We'll make contact. S1, this is Weather Central. Request video signal at grid coordinates COCO.
An emergency situation has developed. In an orbiting space station 1,000 miles above the hurricane, a crewman sends a temporary picture back to Weather Central.
Okay, S1, your video is R5S5. Thank you.
The hurricane has stopped moving toward the coast, but is still intensifying. It must be made to move northward and out to sea. This is a crisis.
Aberdeen Station, activate multiple seeding rockets on course 117.
The controller decides to fire cloud seeding rockets just ahead of the hurricane, hoping to start it moving. Slowly, the hurricane begins to shift. All available forces have been brought into play. Now we can only watch and wait. After hours of tension, the turning point is reached. Latest reports indicate the control strategy is successful. At last, the high-pressure ridge has settled along the coast, forming an invisible wall of safety. The storm is over. The danger has passed. The hurricane has been defeated, turned away from the land, and left to spend itself harmlessly far out at sea. In the world of tomorrow, weather control will enrich and safeguard our daily lives. In the foreseeable future, we will conquer more than violent storms. We will turn the destructive elements of today into new sources of power, shaping the land on which we live. All mankind will benefit. Arid wastelands will be made green and fertile, and vast frozen areas will become productive. To this end, man-made satellites will probe the secrets of the skies. They will be our eyes in outer space.
Weather modification programs, experimental ones done by private companies, done by the United States government, done by states across the United States, are underway. There's more than 50 of them in operation across the United States. All of these impact agriculture because they change the microclimates needed for agriculture to survive. None of these programs that I know of today, and this is all public record, are available at any time with oversight, agricultural oversight or public oversight. These programs impact agriculture, and there are programs around the world. International corporations are modifying our weather all the time, and they're modifying it in ways that cover thousands and thousands of square miles. Most of it is chemically altered, so that what happens is that we are putting chemicals, ground-based chemicals that are shot into the air, or chemicals coming from airplanes that change and modify our weather. So one of the things that I'm concerned about and that we need to address in the future is how these programs are impacting microclimates needed for our crops to survive and needed for pollination. If we change the growing season, the pollinators may not survive, and also our crops, our flowers, and our tree crops may not get the pollination needed. So one of my areas is looking at this situation to see if we can begin to put under control experimental and other types of weather modification programs. The other issue is that a lot of times we're talking about mitigation for climate change. It's rather an undefined term at this period of time. And so what happens is that many times we're talking about artificially putting chemicals like sulfur or particulates into the atmosphere in what they call geoengineering schemes to reduce and help the planet, supposedly, but help the planet to not go through such a tremendous global climate change and to mitigate global warming. However, the incidence of putting chemicals into our atmosphere is going to change and impact agricultural crop production. And if you take and you put up into our skies chemicals to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the earth, you are going to begin to reduce crop production. Studies at the University of Illinois on corn crop production show reductions. Without the process of photosynthesis, whereby plants from direct sunlight gain the energy to grow, to produce crops, we are going to find ourselves, if we mitigate in that direction, impacting the crop production not only here in the United States, but worldwide. One of the things that is impacting crop production right now in the United States and reducing photosynthesis and also impacting the ability of solar power panels to generate the type of power that they should is persistent jet contrails. NASA talks about persistent jet contrails as exacerbating global warming because they trap warmth in the atmosphere when they produce cirrus and man-made clouds. NASA also talks about that that these aircraft leaving persistent contrails are changing our climate. And when they change our climate to the degree that one jet can leave a persistent jet contrail which will spread across our skies from what this picture up here on my left on the screen looks like, which is a trail left by a jet, that trail can expand to 4,000 kilometers and last for 20 hours. This was unheard of in the early 60s and the 70s, and it wasn't until the late 1980s that there was a change and we started to have persistent jet contrails that persist. NASA studies show that part of our global warming problem could be attributed to these types of contrails and the jets that leave them. So one of the issues as we go through is, how do you like your skies, natural or man-made? And right now we are making man-made clouds, and this is trapping warmth in our atmosphere. The climate change that is produced by these jets, not all jets, mostly some non-commercial, but what happens to our skies is that we start to see the changes. The man-made clouds do trap the warmth, and they increase the humidity. This allows for pests to proliferate, diseases, molds, mildews, funguses, and viruses. This is a man-made cloud, ladies and gentlemen, and these pictures I took myself over Northern California, and this is a burst. This is where a jet left a huge plume, and then this turned in at the end of it to a burst, and this is not normal, never seen before in our county historically, and I was born and raised there. This is another picture showing the jet trail just before the burst. This is our skies, and I want you to know that what you're seeing now, a lot of times many scientists know, especially at NASA and in other areas, that the skies that we're seeing are not normal cloud formations. These are man-made. And what happens as we reduce the amount of sunlight in a form of global dimming, we reduce the solar power with these type of clouds, and we reduce photosynthesis, which is going to impact agriculture. The pictures look odd. The formations don't look like normal clouds that people have seen before historically. This is another type of man-made cloud, and what we have done and what you're seeing here is we have the photographs from the times that the jet leaves the first trail as a thin, spindly trail to where they form into these different types of cloud formations. All of you can start looking up and seeing this. What happens is that there are experiments, and there's a color, you can see some color in this photograph. And part of what we're doing also is we're sending up canisters. The United States government, NASA, the U.S. Air Force, is sending up canisters into the atmosphere filled with chemicals to modify and experiment with our ionosphere. And when we modify and experiment with our ionosphere up here, we create experiments which they can see through these persistent jet contrails as they stay in the sky for long periods of time, and they can watch the experiments. The type of chemicals they are using are aluminum, barium, strontium, and these canisters are sent up on rockets, and what they do is they superheat the canisters to create experiments in our atmosphere. The experiments can give you colorful auroras, which they talk about as being wonderful. Many times people think that the auroras in Alaska and the ones we see are normal, but there's beginning to be more and more seen across the United States and elsewhere where aluminum, trimethyl aluminum experiments to make clouds are beginning to impact us. The reason I am concerned for agriculture is that none of these experiments have any public oversight nor agricultural oversight. Our drinking water is impacted because the chemicals are now beginning to show up in our drinking water. In California, the State Department of Health drinking water tests were examined between 1970 and this year, and we found unusual spiking in barium, aluminum, strontium, magnesium, calcium, manganese, and all of these spiked at the same time in various drinking water supplies across the state of California and also in Arizona. So what's happening with these atmospheric tests is that aluminum, as one example, gets into, with increased pollution and acid rain, gets into the root systems of our crop trees and our trees, and it looks like the trees are dying of drought. But they're not. What happens is that the root systems can no longer absorb the water and the nutrients needed to survive. Many of our forests in Redding, California and other areas are dying. The oak trees, the redwood trees, the Douglas fir across the United States, many areas. We believe that these trees are impacted because they cannot absorb enough water because aluminum is going into their root systems. Also, molds, mildew, and fungus from warmer temperatures produced by persistent jet contrails are also allowing pests and molds to proliferate, also impacting tree health and crop health. The skies that you see up here, it is important to note, have a white haze to them. When crossing the United States 2 days ago, we saw this man-made produced haze all the way across the United States. There were a few real clouds. We saw the persistent jet contrails from the jet windows, and the skies in the white haze looked a lot like this. So one of the things that we need to really look at is that jet fuel emissions contaminate our air, much as automobile exhaust. They know from scientific studies back in the 1970s that they deplete beneficial ozone in the atmosphere by releasing nitric acid. So one of the things that we need to look at is the impact of just jet fuel and just the emissions from jets as well. I want to go on and talk briefly about a couple of issues here that I think are important for everyone to realize. If we don't look at the problems that we are creating, the atmospheric testing programs, in other words, the jet contrails that are warming our climate, and we say to ourselves, we want to geoengineer something else. We want to add more particulates to help global warming or to stop climate change. What we're going to have is we're going to have a pea soup up there of chemicals which are going to be detrimental to our health. It is much better to take the EPA model of the 1970s, where the Environmental Protection Agency was designed to put in regulations to reduce the pollution at its source, to reduce and put caps on how much pollution corporations, cars, automobiles were putting into the atmosphere. One of the things that we're talking about as mitigation is to go into geoengineering plans which add more chemicals to our atmosphere, which are going to get into our drinking water supplies, which are going to get into our soils, which are going to impact our trees. Our trees across the United States, many of them in many areas, especially Mendocino, Lake, and Sonoma County, are dying. They are not healthy as they used to be. And this problem, having traveled across the United States into some other areas, seeing the pictures coming in from across the United States and other countries, we're finding that there's beginning to be an impact from all of these programs and all the chemicals in our skies. And so one of the things we need to think about and work for is reducing pollution. Alan Buckman from the California State Department and Fish and Game talked about microbes, and they're important to the environment. We have at our disposal already some technologies and already the wherewithal to begin to make the planet more healthy and to put it into a different perspective. But if we go to the geoengineering schemes that are waiting in the wings, thousands of them, to put the particulates up and sulfur, then we are going to be in trouble with agriculture across the United States and around the world. It is time that we look at some different solutions that are already here, and it's time that we look at what's happening in our skies and say we don't need to add any more chemicals, we are doing enough. And what these experiments in our skies are doing with atmospheric heating and testing, we don't know, but the chemicals are showing up in our drinking water. So in closing, I would like to say to all of you and to encourage you to know that just what I showed you today is beginning to impact crop production in the United States. And we're seeing higher UV radiation that is burning the tips of our trees and our plants. We see the molds and mildews growing here, and we see all of this, and we hope that all of you will consider before you think of mitigation and just go forward with some of the plans that are being sold to you as almost a cap and trade situation where a corporation like Planktos decides to put iron dust into the Galapagos Islands area, this is a proposal, may have already started, and to create algae blooms. And yes, they're saying, yes, we're going to help the environment because we're going to create these algae blooms for more oxygen. But what happens is it's going to impact the marine life in those areas. As a geoengineering plan, it is going to be sold, the credits for this, the supposed benefits, is to be sold as credits to people who want to pollute more. And here's the really awful twist to this, in my opinion, is if we sell pollution credits to polluters to ask them so that they can pollute more, we're only going to add more to our climate change and to our global warming processes. We have to say, no, we don't want money market schemes that are going to go into the ocean and change something possibly to the detriment of our oceans or our air, in order to sell credits to someone who wants to pollute more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a consideration for all of you when you start to talk about caps and trades, when you start to talk about geoengineering plans, because we don't need a money market scheme. We need to have and use the microbes available to us, the science available to us to reduce the pollution that we're putting into the atmosphere, and we need a new direction, and I think that this might be a good one. So I hope that all of you will consider what I have to say today, and I want to thank you once again for listening to what I had to say.
Thank you.
We shall propose further cooperative efforts between all the nations in weather prediction and eventually in weather control.